Welcome to KRWG Public Media's Election 2025 Candidate Forum for Las Cruces City Council District 5. I'm KC Counts. The rules for this forum will require the candidate not to mention an opponent by name. The candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question. We invited challenger Ronnie Sisneros to attend, but he declined. Incumbent candidate Becky Corran is with us. Thank you, Councilor Corran, for participating.
Thank you for having me.
Begin by telling us what skills and experience in your background have prepared you for representing constituents in District 5.
Well, in my day job, I am a public health professional and I teach community college classes at Doña Ana Community College. And public health, I think, as a discipline, really encourages you to think about community, environment, equity, and upstream solutions to big problems that we face in public health, but then that also applies a lot in city council. So that's partly why I felt like I would fit in on city council, thinking about things like parks and pets and zoning. But as I've been on city council, I've come to realize that some of my fundamental values that I bring to those conversations, really focusing on the most marginalized populations and understanding how their experience in Las Cruces might shape what we can do differently. I really want to continue to bring that to council.
And if elected, what are your top priorities?
My top priorities are continuing the great work we've been doing on housing. We've approved funding for and started building over 600 units, but we're still about 4,500 units short. So we have a lot of work to do to continue to build our housing stock. I also am a huge advocate for transit. I think we can up the frequency of some of our bus routes, and I really want to champion the library's expansion as it's much needed in our community.
On the topic of public safety, what role does City Council play in creating a safer community, and what efforts do you plan to pursue to that end?
You know, community safety really comes from a place where everyone can feel safe going about their days, and that means addressing things like housing, fundamentally making sure that people have access to education, healthcare, and that our healthcare and emergency services are able to respond to emergencies. In City Council, we oversee, you know, sort of the budget of the city, and about a third to 2/3, depending on what all you count as part of public safety, is part of our budget. So that includes the police department and the fire department. A number of things that we've championed in the last few years include the Project Light, which focuses on mental health services and addressing sort of when people get calls related to people that are experiencing mental health crisis. We're able to send co-responders, including social workers, who can help get those folks the care that they need rather than the law enforcement response that might normally be what happens. Other things that we've done, we've supported Chief Story in evidence-based policing. We've invested in a real-time crime center, which allows the police to use technology to address crime as it's happening in the community. So that just came online in the last few months. So that's really exciting development too.
I wanted to ask specifically about the Real-Time Crime Center. What does it do exactly, and how will it impact public safety while balancing privacy concerns?
I will say that as a person, I think I really do have a big concern about privacy and surveillance, and I think there's a slippery slope that we should definitely consider. But I would also say that we know that Las Cruces is a very large area, and responding to emergencies as they come into dispatch can take a long time, right? Just driving from one part of town to another can take a significant amount of time. The Real-Time Crime Center focuses on cameras that already exist primarily in community that are in places that have been designated as high crime, or cameras outside of schools, not inside of schools. But the Real-Time Crime Center connects all of those cameras, many of which already exist, to feed into a central area that allows police, when they're responding or before they respond, they have a lot more information to address the crisis when they are approaching it. So they know if they need to ask for Project Light, they know if they need backup. And so the Real-Time Crime Center uses dispatch and all of the existing cameras to sort of have more information. It does have additional things like drones to respond to emergencies, and those are really, it's really interesting to see the ways that privacy can be balanced with that. For instance, all of the video from all of these cameras is kept for only 7 days, unless it's identified as something that goes with a crime, so that it can't be shared or taken in another place. Another thing is they keep the eyes of the cameras away from individuals as much as possible. The drones, for instance, only are very high level to protect people's privacy and make sure that we're taking care of that. But we are looking at other ways to introduce more privacy measures into our public safety system to make sure that people's privacy is protected, but also that we're able to respond to emergencies when we need to.
Earlier you mentioned Project Light. I'd like for you to take this opportunity to expand on how you think it has impacted the community, and do you feel there are other ways that City Council can address mental health crisis management?
I think Project Light, which stands for Lessening the Incidence of Grief and Trauma, is a co-responder model that utilizes our fire department's emergency response techniques along with a team of social workers who are trained at helping people navigate the really complex service environment that we're in Las Cruces. I think it's a really powerful tool, but I also know that we can't always send Project Light when we need to. So there is room for us to expand that program as it goes along. But I think also we need to continue to partner and strengthen our partnerships with the community organizations that are really doing the most powerful work in terms of mental health services, ranging from Community of Hope, which is working with the unhoused and people on the margins in that way, to FYI, La Clinica and Ben Archer and Amador Health Center, all of which are really primary care mental health care providers, making sure that the Crisis Triage Center remains up and operating. It's really important. When that was down, it created a lot more crises than we weren't able to respond as well. The police would really struggle with what to do with folks. And then finally, this is sort of emergencies, not necessarily mental health related, but the city fire department has taken over ambulance service from a private contractor that had been doing it for about 15 years. And so I do believe that our fire department are award-winning emergency responders, and so I think that they'll be really well staffed, and we plan to fund their ability to respond to emergencies as much as possible.
What steps has City Council taken to address property crime, and what additional steps, if any, do you believe are needed?
I think the hotspot policing and the real-time crime center, I think are part of this property crime response, because understanding when property crime is happening, the police are using the evidence from the calls that come in and then using that to patrol certain areas, so their presence is there. We also have cameras in different locations to respond to that, but also addressing nuisance properties is a big part of what we're working on. We just heard this week about the nuisance abatement team, which establishes 3 levels of nuisance properties, and that includes both commercial and abandoned properties where we know that bad things end up happening. So we're looking at ways to use codes and enforcement and liens on properties that might be sort of magnets for crime in communities. So those are some of the ways that I think we can.
I'd like to expand on that just a little bit, those nuisance properties. And can you explain some of the difficulties that go into addressing those?
Yes, I mean, first of all, we don't want homes that people are living in to be at risk, but many people can't afford necessarily to keep up with some of the first level things that are home repairs, especially in this sort of economic environment. So nuisance properties that have people in them, we're really going to work on figuring out ways to support them using some of the housing resources that we already have and increasing funding for those that support homeowners to improve their homes so that they're more livable. But the secondary tier of homes that are abandoned, we've found that it's really difficult to even know who those properties belong to. In many cases, the property owner passed away. They may not have heirs to pass it on to, and so those properties are truly in a place of ambiguity, right? So it's really hard to know who do you ask to fix that property. Also, New Mexico has very strong laws to protect private property owners, and so the city can't just take a property. That's not something that we're able to do in any situation, and so we have to also consider really the property owner's rights first, and hopefully find the property owner in that context.
Seems like a long process.
It is a long process, and even developing this thing, we've learned new things, right? Like what happens when the most recent structure that we agreed to tear down, the person had died almost 20 years before, and it took us about 12 years to find out that had even happened. And so yeah, it's a really lengthy process.
What opportunities and challenges does Realize Las Cruces present?
Realize Las Cruces, our comprehensive zoning reform, is the most progressive zoning reform in New Mexico, and one of the most progressive zoning reforms in the US, and it allows property owners to do more things with their property. So I think in a lot of ways, the opportunities that it presents are, we haven't necessarily we had created a regulatory structure that made it very difficult to do things like build a casita in your yard, and Realize sort of plows away many of those barriers. You still have to build the code and do all of those things, but it's really it's your right as a property owner to expand your living space in those ways. And so I think there are great opportunities for us to partner with people to increase the sort of, some folks call them granny flats, right? So people can age in place or live with their family members that are going to NMSU, that have their kids stay in the backyard. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to provide building plans for ADUs that are very easy and ready to go, that fit within Realize, and to support multifamily housing developments as they come up, because this has made it easier for folks to develop multifamily housing. I think the biggest challenges are some of the things are not part of how we've done things in the past, right? Like it also has guidance for how many trees have to be along the road and how we protect bicyclists as they go along, or that businesses don't have to have as much parking as they did historically. And so those things are challenges in that it's a new world for us, right? And so we haven't necessarily always been thinking in those ways, and I don't know that people who are developing spaces have started thinking about what that means for their developments of especially commercial spaces.
What has been the response from the public so far?
People did not, the vast majority, Realize took about 4 years of development, including a technical advisory board and a community input board, and all of our staff's work during those years. And during that time, we took a lot of feedback, a lot of input from community members. When we passed Realize, which is about 400 pages, so it's a thrilling read if you want to go to bed. When we passed Realize, some folks were really upset about, in particular, how it would infringe on individual property rights. But what we're finding is, this is true of, I've already had several residents call me up and say, you know what, I just put in my permit for my carport that I've wanted to build for many years, and they approved it already, and they were shocked. So I think while folks were upset, at the passage when it happened, what we're hearing in terms of feedback from both property owners and commercial businesses is that it's really helping them think differently about how they're going to develop their land.
How can Las Cruces City Council continue to affect housing affordability?
I think housing affordability is a really complicated topic. I do think that we need to continue to partner with, we've had a lot of success partnering with state legislators, but also state financing institutions and private developers who are sort of able to leverage their capacity. I think Las Cruces just got an award recognizing the team of folks who work with private developers and others to find federal funding for low-income housing tax credits that actually is expanded with the Big Beautiful Bill, the capacity for that. So we're well positioned to take advantage of that. But we also need to make sure that we're paying attention to things like there are some gaps in terms of people who are maybe in danger of becoming homeless, and I think, or losing their house because their rent is going up or because their property is becoming unlivable. And I think there is a lot of room for us to increase our support for tenants in those spaces, and also landlords. We have a landlord risk mitigation fund that we use to support landlords, but I think we need to continue that and potentially expand it so that more landlords feel comfortable renting to folks who might have vouchers, and making sure that people who are on the edge of housing insecurity right now, we're there to catch them before they become unhoused. So
maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the housing developments that have broken ground or already been built, I believe 3 or 4 in just the last few months that we've learned about, maybe the last few years that have been in the works.
In District 5, we have Peachtree housing development, which will be 288 apartments, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. That's with a private developer, and those will be affordable for 40 years. So they'll be indexed to area median income for 40 years to make sure that people can afford it. So those are almost, I would say, February, we're thinking that folks might start moving into the early phases of Peachtree. We also have Pedrena apartments, which are along El Paseo in our El Paseo Metropolitan Redevelopment Area, which is for seniors, low-income seniors. And that's folks have just started moving in there this past week, and that's also has a lot of amenities, just like Peachtree. My pet project is literally animals, and so all of these places allow for pets. Many of them have dog parks. They have playgrounds for kids. The senior apartment doesn't have playgrounds for kids, but But those are a few of the amenities that are in those ones. We're also breaking ground or starting to build Amador Crossing, which is an incredibly dynamic and interesting housing development on the Community of Hope campus that is permanent supportive housing that is no barrier. And so we partnered with a lot of state legislators and other folks who are really interested in making sure that threats to federal funding for permanent supportive housing could not affect us. And so that will be 50 units for folks that has services available on campus for them. So those are 3 recent ones.
What would you say is the #1 infrastructure concern for District 5, and how would you plan to address it?
This is a great question, and the answer is always very boring. Thank you for asking about infrastructure, the most boring topic. Roads, people are always thrilled about that. What I hear from residents in District 5, which is really north of 70 and east of Elks, so it's a lot of new development. I think what I hear from folks is they wish their neighborhoods were safer to walk in, more pedestrian safety, neighborhood traffic calming to make sure that kids that are playing out in the street aren't at risk of being run over at a really high rate of speed. That is the single biggest thing that people, when I knock on their doors, ask me to do, is slow down traffic in their neighborhood and make it safer for them to walk and ride bikes. And so infrastructure-wise, that's a challenge. We have to figure that out. We can use education, engineering, or enforcement, and all in some combination, but we know that engineering is the most effective way, so building different infrastructure that's safer for pedestrians is really a big part of that.
Are there funds coming that way?
Yes, so thanks to the voters of Las Cruces, we passed an increased gross receipts tax, and in fact, over the next 2 weeks, 2 weeks or so, folks will be able to give input to infrastructure priorities within each of their council districts. And those funds, we anticipate it will probably add about $20 million a year to our combination of revenue and bonding capacity that will allow us to address some of the infrastructure needs that folks are thinking about.
Since we moved on to some of those funds, coupled with that, I wanted to ask you about how you believe our expected opioid settlement money can be best utilized.
I think I'm really excited about the process that has gone into the opioid settlement funding discussion so far. We did a collaborative committee with folks who are really closest to the issues that people with substance use disorder are experiencing, that families of people with substance use disorder are experiencing, and that team committee with the county and the city have proposed a number of things that really opioid funding is meant to save lives today, right? So I'm really excited that we are investing the vast majority of this into immediate substance use remediation, so things like Narcan and emergency response, and making sure that people get care immediately when they need it, but also in terms of the types of programs that folks can use, including medication-assisted treatment, which we know is the gold standard for treatment of people who are experiencing substance use disorder. And so that's the primary investment, really getting folks the treatment and care that they need in the immediate short term. And then there's also a component related to prevention that we'll be funding with LCPS on social and emotional learning, and they also, LCPD also will be doing some drug abatement sort of conversations, not dare, in schools.
How do you plan to address transparency in city government, and moving forward, what steps do you think should be taken to ensure that the public has the information it needs?
I think transparency is really interesting because I believe that we should be extraordinarily transparent, and everything that we do is really public and able to be seen by the public in terms of what we talk about in our meetings, our published works, and then making sure that everything is online and available for folks. But there's still a pretty big gap, and I think you have to be really savvy to really know what's going on with your city government, and you have to be able to go to meetings at 1 p.m. on Monday afternoons, although they are videotaped so people can watch at any time if they're so inclined. But I think that we have a lot of room in terms of how we develop policies, and we've been slowly trying to work on this. That is, we have work sessions like we did this week for the nuisance abatement, and that gives the public a really strong sense of what kind of things the inner city government working, which really is not much of what city council does. We trust the staff within the city to do a lot of that, but really folks talk about what are they experiencing on the ground. We talked about the nuisance abatement, and we heard from firefighters who were having to go to emergency response where places were filled with trash, right? Empty buildings were filled with trash, and they weren't sure if there were people in there, and they were having to put out fires. And so making that transparent in places like work sessions and then taking action later, I think is a really powerful tool for us to really make sure that folks know what's happening with our city government. But I think also being really accessible fundamentally as a human being. I strive to always share information with constituents as much as possible in the context that I think really matter to them. But also social media, we can't compete with social media. So there's a tension between sort of what people know or what people find out on Facebook. And so I think resolving that tension, I'm not sure if I have a solution or an idea for that, but I know that is part of the idea of transparency and what we need to consider in our decision making.
So what are the tools that you plan to use to best connect with residents moving forward?
I think I make sure that I'm always connected to residents in terms of my email and responding to things and going to community meetings in my district. And then secondarily, I have social media accounts where I try to share information for different audiences and different kinds of things in that context, but I'm not perfect at this. I think also inside the city, we've really been building up a communications team that's working more strategically in terms of following up. We now have a system that looks at what people are asking about in our Ask Las Cruces app, what their most common questions are, and the communications team now is developing social media sort of campaigns related to that. So they're using a lot of the data that we're collecting as a city in terms of our response and taking care of things to understand what we need to educate folks about or make sure that we're being really more transparent about those things in the future. So I think systematically we can approach this in that way, but I also try to really I have my own newsletter and other ways of connecting with people and always just really going to every event that we can, like in our districts. And I think those are, frankly, I see people at Albertsons all the time who ask me things like, what about my road? And that's a big part of what I'm proud of being in a community that is like Las Cruces.
What do you think city representatives could be doing to engage young voters and inspire more political participation among that demographic?
That's a great question, because in the city council election, which is typically, I think, about 12% participation, and the average age of those folks, I think, is about 57. So talking about the demographics of folks who choose our leaders, I think it's really important to pay very close attention to what young folks are saying. And I think teaching at the community college, I already have this connection, and I try to listen really carefully to what my students are saying and what they're experiencing, and that's in part why I care so much about housing and cost of living and those sorts of things on city council, is because I'm connected to folks who talk about those bread and butter issues every day as shaping their experience. But I think paying attention to what folks really need, and then understanding that I'm an old, relatively, in the scheme of things, understanding that the way that we came to understand the world, and I think we hear this when we talk about like youth and violence and all of these contexts, understanding how folks' lives have been shaped by things like the COVID-19 pandemic and social media, knowing that I don't actually know how to communicate with young people most successfully, right? Like here I am in this forum being an old, as always, because that's who I am. So I think connecting with folks, really listening to them at the front on social media, in the spaces where we connect with them, and then having things that are relevant happening, relevant to their world happening with City Council is really a part of that.
Well, we are down to just our last couple of minutes here, so I want to spend that time having you talk about some important ways that City Council can support and expand sustainable economic growth.
Sustainable economic growth. I think this is a great question in our recent context with economic growth that's coming to town or coming to our region. And I think sustainability and economic growth can go hand in hand. You know, we have, in Las Cruces, we have set greenhouse gas goals, and we're really thinking about how to contribute best to our environment and making sure that it is protected. And so when we think about economic development in that context, we're thinking about all of the things like what are the energy needs of this corporation. We're also thinking about how we use land. And so I think supporting economic development, Realize Las Cruces was a big part of that because we are both able to build more housing for the people who work here, and businesses are able to use their land better to serve people and make more money in the process. We're also, I think the metropolitan redevelopment areas will allow us to focus money in ways that we normally don't necessarily do that, because we're making a commitment to rebuild the economic diversity in certain areas like El Paseo, where we know there are a lot of abandoned businesses or businesses that are struggling. And so metropolitan redevelopment areas like the tax increment development district that was downtown, or is downtown still, allows us to concentrate resources and support businesses, especially small businesses that are in our infill areas, better. So I think we have a lot of opportunities, and then I think we also have a lot of ways that we can leverage. I think Las Cruces continues to be a place where people love to be, and I think that in combination with Visit Las Cruces, in combination with all three of the chambers, we continue to make the case about why Las Cruces' quality of life and environment is really where people want to be. And I think that is only improving every year, right? I think we continue on that path to make it a great place to be.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have. Las Cruces City Council District 5 incumbent candidate Becky Corran, thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. We invited challenger Ronnie Sisneros, but he declined. Stay tuned for more candidate forums, and remember, you can watch all our forums and interviews at krwg.org as they are conducted. You can also find links to important voter information. I'm KC Counts. Thank you for watching this forum ahead of the November 4th election.